Howdy, and welcome back to You've Got People Problems, where we tackle the leadership challenges that no one wants to talk about, but every business faces. I'm your host, Mel Ortiz with Activate Human Capital Group, and this is episode 5. Today I'm joined by Randy McDougall, an experienced entrepreneur and EOS implementer, to talk about one of the hardest but most important leadership skills, being open and honest when it comes to dealing with people issues. Leaders who dodge these important conversations don't make problems disappear, they make them worse. So in this episode, we dive into how to reframe accountability as empowerment rather than punishment, why avoiding tough conversations only makes leadership harder, how self-awareness is the foundation of great leadership, and tools and strategies to align your team and improve performance. If you've ever found yourself hesitating to address accountability gaps, misaligned expectations, or leadership challenges, this episode is for you. Let's get to it. Randy, take the stage. Tell us about you.
All right, thank you, Melissa. And I love just you talking about what you do with teams and how to help really draw out the best in people and the best in the team. And I think that it connects so well with EOS and what we're trying to do. EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System, and it's based on the concept that people want something out of every organization. That's why they start businesses. They want something. But usually after they're a year, 2 years, 3 years in it, and sometimes even after just a few months, they just are a slave to the business. And that's a concept that's been around a while. And how does a team move from where they're really enslaved by the business to where they're getting what they want out of the business? Sometimes that's money, obviously that's part of it, but it's also just the life you want to live and working with the team you want to work with and doing something you really love, making a huge difference. All of those are part of what we call the EOS Life. And it's about recognizing that there are some simple, practical tools that have been around, many of them for, even 100 years, that if we implement those in this very proven, complete process, people can experience what we call vision, which is just everybody get on the same page. Where are we going? How do we intend to get there? Traction, where everyone has accountability to actually work on that. Because if you're like me, you've probably seen a lot of organizations and everybody's not accountable for going to the same direction. And then healthy, where teams are really have a great health, great conversations. They're open. They get to the root of the issue and solve them. And the idea is, as the leadership team goes, so goes the organization. So once you have vision, traction, healthy for the leadership team, then it's cascading it down to every person in the organization. So they're totally clear on where you're going, what they're accountable for every day when they walk in the door. And healthy, they know how to really get to the root of problems, address them, and solve them for good, which makes life a lot more fun to work together. So we break it into 6 components of the EOS model, and I could go on for 3 hours on this, but I'll pause it there.
Yeah, I'm writing my notes on where I want to interrupt you, and I'm holding off because I'm really bad at interrupting. So that's something I'm working on. Here are a couple of things that struck me, Randy, that are the reason that I've aligned my work so closely with EOS. One of them is you were talking about being a slave to the business. And I think the thing that shocks employees especially is that often the owners are a slave to, and they don't see a way out. And they sure don't want to let down their team members who rely on that person for their livelihood. And EOS is such a great mechanism for helping those owners rise above the business, work on their business, have a pathway that works, and a whole cohort of people who are walking that path as well. That's the power of Vistage, the power of EO. And I appreciate you bringing that up because I think EOS implementers don't often enough talk about that part of the business. The other thing that really resonated with me was the statement you said that everybody wants something out of it. And there's an entrepreneur in San Antonio named Graham Weston. He's the founder of Rackspace. And he says this thing that captures everything I've ever done in the human capital space. And it's this: we all want to be valued members of a winning team on an inspiring mission. And that encapsulates everything the science around engagement says. It encapsulates everything I've ever seen in the strengths and employee effectiveness space, even when those employees are volunteers who aren't being paid. I want to be a valued member, which means I get to contribute my talents at work, not my weaknesses. on a winning team, and even people who are not competitive, they want to win because that energy that comes with a winning team is tangible. And then on an inspiring mission, we're doing something that matters.
Yeah.
And if we can get those things right, and I think EOS is a really good way to help us define what is our vision? How do we know if we've got there? We've got some big targets. And all of these pieces come together. So those were the things that really resonated. And then the simple tools. There are a lot of systems out there. And I think EOS has probably captured the simplest, most approachable tools.
Mhm.
I'm in EO and they do a lot of scaling up. And it's funny how the scaling up conversations always get overshadowed with the EOS conversations. People are bringing up, well, in my level 10s, and the facilitator always struggles with like, do I let this go? Do I try to recorrect to the scaling up language? And so it just makes me laugh.
Yeah, yeah. And the good news is there's a lot of good tools out there. And as you and I have talked about, it's not like EOS is the only one. But just to be honest, I always say I've drunk the EOS Kool-Aid. It's the one that partially for me, it's crazy simple. And part of what I tie it back to is all the great things in life, all the really profound things. And I'm not saying EOS is one of the most profound things in human history. I don't want to say that. But if you look at those deep truths, they're crazy simple, but they're crazy hard. And I think that's the reality is really getting it down to what's really simple and then spending our life becoming world class at the simple.
It is. It is. And I agree with you. Although I may lean a little more agnostic in my approach, I think whether it's a behavioral assessment or an operating system, it's like wine. The wine you like is the wine that's good, and you
That's
should
right.
use that.
That's right.
And but I have an affinity for EOS. I would say in the assessment world, Strengths Finder and Predictive Index are probably my two favorites,
Yeah, yeah.
just because the language is most approachable uh, in everyday language. So take us back in time a little bit, Randy, before we move forward with our topic. Tell me a little bit about how long have you been using EOS, helping other companies implement these tools, and what are the main people issues you're seeing with clients today? I know that's a three-part question, so feel free to.
Yeah, yeah, there's and I'm old enough there's kind of a long history. So there's kind of my two levels of it. One was back in the 90s when I had a business and struggling through some things. That was before Gino put EOS together, wrote the book Traction, and I had a couple of mentors who came alongside, a good bit older, and they started teaching me the basic tools. And for me, it was really life-changing. I both loved it, but it also really changed the way I approach business. And so I then started digging into those more and more and both did some work with other teams, coaching after I sold that business, but also using it in some businesses that I had and was part of. Then about 7, 8 years ago, I guess about 10, 12 years ago, I ran into EOS and I was like, oh, this is pretty good. And to be honest, I said, this is almost as good as what I do. But then about 7 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I was had sold my part of a business and was in a transition. And in that process, somebody just said to me, Randy, you've got to be an EOS implementer. And it was the blinding flash of the obvious. It was literally almost like the clouds parted. And I've been
Angel
on that
saying,
track ever since. Yeah. No, no looking back. And it's one of those things. It's fun when you find something in life that what you think going in is just as good, or actually it's better than what I thought going in. So that's kind of how I got here. Having failed countless times at many things and seen some great successes too. And that's really part of what I've grown to love about EOS is what we were just talking about. It's not the lack of brilliant stuff. I was just saying to somebody this morning, it's not the lack of brilliant stuff that I've done in my life. And I've done some things that are really cool, but it's the lack of doing the simple stuff consistently over and over that has been the biggest challenges. And so that's what I love about bringing to teams and helping them to just really be solid. And there's nothing better than at the end of the day than knowing that a team is moving to that next level. And then 6 months, a year, 2 years later, seeing them to where part of it's profit, because sometimes I'm seeing teams and they would have some of them, they would have loved to have revenue at some point of what their profits are now, but it's also just enjoying life.
Yeah. It's a whole lot easier to enjoy life when there's profitability, though, isn't it?
That helps, but it's not, it kind of goes hand in hand. You got to have a little bit of both at the same time.
You do. You do. And then if you switch over to the nonprofit world, it's no money, no mission.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's right. And I do work with not most, but a few nonprofits and there's money is important everywhere, but mission and vision is also important everywhere. It's never just about money.
yeah. So tell me, the third part of my question was, what are the main people issues you're seeing with clients today? What's really resonating?
I'm not hearing as much right now about how hard it is to find people. 2, 3 years ago, I'm sure you can tell even
It was
more.
brutal.
Oh yeah, it was totally brutal. So the good news is they're finding people. I think the biggest challenges I see people issues are number one, being really good at knowing what questions to ask to be able to make that assessment. Because most people they just say we don't know, and so it's just kind of like we'll just throw the dice. And well, you
Do
can
we
do
like them? That's really the question they're asking.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it's how do we select those people? And the good news is there's EOS tools, but there's also predictive index and tools that you have that can really help with that. And combined with using the EOS tools and what we call a people analyzer, where we take into account the core values and that absolute clarity. That's usually where it often starts. The manager doesn't even get clarity of what success looks like for what they're hiring. And I know some
Yeah.
people might say, well, of course I know, but to really boil it down to 5 bullet points, these are the big five, and then be able to ask questions, not about theory, but actually ask questions that talk about experience. Tell me about a time when you did this, and tell me about it was really difficult, and what would others say? There's Pat Lencioni makes a great comment that when you ask somebody what would somebody else say about you, they're less likely to make up a story or a lie than so that's just a little
Oh, I
tidbit
love that.
is ask them, but then ask them what somebody else would say, and often that's a way to dig down to
That's
get
going to be one of our tips at the end.
yeah
Uh,
the but then from there it is the challenge of really having these open and honest conversations with the employee so that they get to know when they're successful and they can really believe when they're successful because they also know when things aren't working and they hear it quickly and they get to the root of the issue quickly. And part of it is being totally comfortable. I just was with a team in the last week and I stopped them at some point and I just said, "Hey, ABC company doesn't need you and you don't need ABC company." And getting really comfortable with that because I think that's part of the enslavement people have. And for me, that is one of the most freeing thoughts in my life is if I don't have my job at the end of the day, they'll be okay and I'll be okay. And it just changes the dynamic from either just a demanding something, but also a insecure dependency on this and what's powerful about that in my mind is if we go in with that mindset, then we can really start to say, okay, and if I don't like the mission here, which by the way, not everybody should love your mission. If so, it probably doesn't mean anything, right? And if some people say, this isn't it for me, we want to help them get there really fast. Or if they
yeah.
say, these core values aren't really mine, that's actually a great thing. And getting there faster is better. Whereas most of us, because we're overwhelmed, life is so busy, we're just afraid to lose somebody. We really don't want to have that conversation.
I love that. So, people issues I'm hearing are sorting candidates, asking good questions, figuring out how do we find the right people of the larger pool than we have had in recent years. Um, I'm hearing getting to yes or no pretty quickly. And that, one of the quotes I heard in the entrepreneur world years ago was we're freeing up their future because
Yeah,
it doesn't do us good to keep them if they're not thriving. It
yeah,
doesn't do them good to stay here if they're not thriving. And
love
I
it.
all too often see, especially family businesses, hold on to people because we don't want to let them down.
Hmm,
And you are letting them down. They're going home every day feeling like they're letting you down. And
hmm,
it's this mutually reinforcing shame, I guess, that
Mhm.
we're not doing great things. And so sometimes the best thing we can do is, make a referral to someone else who might need them or just be honest. Because one of my mantras is no one wants to suck at work.
Yeah, that's
No one
exactly.
wants to go to work and not do good work. They don't want to just go through the motions. It's exhausting,
Yeah, yeah,
but doing great work is energizing. And so that's the fun thing to me about right people, right seats is everybody wins. Company wins, financial wins, our own human individuals win, and then our broader community wins when we go home with more energy for our family, for our kids, for the T-ball league, whatever it is we're investing our extra energy in. There's more extra energy if we get the right people in the right seats. So I think that's probably the crux of why I want to align so closely with EOS, because y'all are preaching this mantra that if we get it right, it has a huge ripple effect.
yeah. I think that's so true. And to kind of time back, it's family businesses, but I see it in non-family businesses too. But the what ends up happening is we're all nice. And I work with some really nice people, and I don't want them to not be nice, but I don't want them to operate based on niceness. And that's what I'm always challenging them is don't be nice about people issues. And a client of mine shared this with me, NICE, nothing inside cares enough about Melissa or about me or about the company to actually have the conversation. And part of what I when I developed this open and honest workshop I do with companies and have shared at the EOS conference, part of what I talk about is shifting from nice to being kind. And sometimes you have companies and they're not nice, but they're also not kind. And that's not what we're looking for. If you go to Good to Great, Jim Collins, I believe it's the end of chapter 3, he says, that it's important to be rigorous. Good to great companies are rigorous, but not ruthless about people decisions. And that's
Mm.
such a balance. So if I'm nice, I may not be rigorous because I'm just trying to kind of make everybody happy. And that's we all know that's not a reality, although we try to do that sometimes. But not being ruthless, what that means is I am going to make sure I'm kind in how I do that. And I think that's where predictive index, like the EOS tools, they all give us ways that we can be very kind. And this starts getting into kind of some of the details of what open and honest is really about. And there's a great, great quote from Brene Brown that clarity is kindness. And it just
To
really,
be unclear is to be unkind. I use the opposite of it, but it's the same thing, right? If I'm unclear about what I expect of you, that's not fair. If
yeah,
I'm unclear about where we stand, that's not fair.
yeah,
And it's really not kind. So I love that.
yeah.
Um, I want to get us on track and make sure we cover the most important topic that we came to talk about, which is really how do we get better at being open and honest, especially when it comes to people issues. So where do you want to start that conversation? You have a whole workshop on it. What are some of the key points that people need to know?
All right, so you'll really get me amped up here. So one of the big things, and I got this from Don Tenney, who is Gino's co-founder of EOS, and he and I were talking a number of years ago, and he said open and honest are completely different, and that really just made it so clear to me, and it started to make it practical. Okay, what
Okay, I'm
can
going
I?
to pause you. Open and honest are completely different.
Yes.
Okay, define that. I know you're
Uh,
going there anyway, but I totally took the bait.
they're completely, and you might say kind of independent. They're of each other.
Okay.
And so the way to think of what's helpful to think about is we throw it together like it's one thing, kind of like spaghetti against the wall. Say, let's be open and honest. But if I really can say it's hard to be open and it's hard to be honest and understand there are two different things, then I can begin to really work on developing my openness. And then I can really work on developing my honesty. And because if we just treat them all as one, it just gets a little bit too fuzzy. But the
Okay.
second thing to follow up on this, and this is something I learned in marriage, is that they're completely interdependent. And so when I actually do this workshop, I have it's too big for here, but a 6 foot double-headed spear. And it's got sharp on this end and that end just to use kind of the two ends. And so the idea of it, and at first when I heard this, I didn't get it. But so some people, maybe like me, it may take a little longer, but what happens is they're completely different. So it's the two ends of the spear, and they're both pointy and they're both sharp. If you imagine a sharp knife here and a sharp knife there, but they're also interdependent, that they're connected by the shaft of that spear. And so if it's this way, and say you have the honest end and I have the open end, and I say, Melissa, I'm open, come, be completely honest with me, and you start coming towards me with it. If you say, hey Randy, I really like that shirt, okay, I'm like, great, keep coming. But if you say, when you made that comment, I don't think you were operating according to our core values. If I take that and I stop you and I push back the other way, you now have a vulnerability that on that honest end, it can start to really hurt. And so if I do that, and as I said, sometimes in marriage, my wife would say something to me and I would just jam right back at her. And so she just kind of learned, you know what? There's some topics I just won't go there.
Not worth it.
That's right. It's not worth the pain. It's not worth getting cut. And so part of that is really understanding there are specific things I do when I say I'm being open that shut people down. And that happens in offices all the time. You see, I'm sure you've seen it many times where people just, it's not worth it. This is just a job. And they begin to disconnect from that because it's too painful. So that's what starts to happen. By the same token, it also goes the other way. If I'm on the honest end and you're on the open end, I need to understand this is sharp. And if I don't become really talented and develop my skills about being honest, I just end up cutting up and I just leave this bloody mess for the other person. And they just say, why be open? It's like, again, it's
It hurts too much.
that same thing. So then you have organizations where people are saying, around here, it hurts too much to be honest, so I'm not going to be honest. And around here, it hurts too much to be open, so I'm not going to do that either. And suddenly people stop talking to each other, and now the real conversations don't get had. And instead of addressing a people issue, we just talk about it going down the hall, is kind of muttering on the side and don't really address it. The person never really gets a fair shot at addressing what they need to change. And we don't get a fair shot of really building a great employee, but we also tend to hang on to them longer. Because if we're actually open and honest, it may help them to say, yep, there's a better place for me. So part of what I try to work with teams are specific steps. What can I do to be more open? And what can the team do to be more open? And then what can I do to be more honest? And what can the team do to be more honest? And what does that actually look like?
So here's what's coming to my mind that is what my clients would say. They would hear you say that and they'd say, okay, so we're talking about the compliment sandwich. We're going to like soften the spear and we're going to say something really nice. And then we're going to put in the honesty and then we're going to say something really nice and that will soften the tip of the spear. Is that one of the tips or is that misguided? Tell me your 2 cents on that.
I love that you brought that up. I had not even thought about that. I'm actually curious what you say, but I'm going to go ahead and jump in. As I would say, can that, blank sandwich that we hear about, I think people, they see it a mile away and it feels manipulative and it's not helpful. I don't think it's kind because what we're doing is we're trying to be nice and leaving everybody feel good. And it really makes the compliments less valuable because they don't really mean anything because people don't hear it. And it puts a lack of trust in the whole discussion. And so sometimes it's just a matter of saying, Melissa, this is going to be a really tough conversation. And I'm going to have it because I think it's really important. I care about you, your work, and the company and achieving what we're going to do. And then just dive right into it. So it's not the sandwich. So I don't know what you think about that, but that would be what I suggest on that. I want to talk about a couple of specific tools, but any feedback on that? Do you have a different thought?
No, I have a similar thought. I think it discredits all of our compliments. because it trains people to say, when I'm hearing a compliment from you, I don't even hear it. All I'm doing is wading through for where's the but.
Yes. Yeah.
Really like that shirt, but it's not so appropriate for this environment. I hope you wear it on Saturday night to the
Yeah.
event that you're
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
And I know so many leaders use it out of they're sincerely trying to soften the blow. And there's this great book, I think her name was Sherry Harley, called How to Say Anything to Anyone.
Mm.
And there's this tip in here that I just love, and I've listened to the book a couple times. And she says, when you onboard a new employee, or you can do it midstream in their employment, you say, Randy, my job as your manager is to help you be aware of things that are getting in your way because I assume you want to learn and grow here. But I kind of need your permission to tell you when those things come. Do I? Do I have permission to do that? If I see or notice anything, is that okay with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Love
if
it.
you say yes, guess what? I get to come at you with exactly the conversation you said, like, okay, remember when we said we were going to have hard conversations? This is one of them. I'm really sorry and it hurts me to say this, but do I have your permission to continue? And it can give us permission as leaders and the employee who's already given permission to say, no, I actually want to hear this, because they're all going to say yes. And then it gets into these hard conversations in a little softer way with an upfront contract that we had already agreed on weeks, months, years ago. And that was one of the most beautiful segues into these hard conversations that I've seen.
Yeah, I love it. Love what you're saying there. And I think that's really valuable is sometimes asking the question just to get clarity because every once in a while somebody will say no. And I actually had a partner do that once. No, I don't want to have that. And that was really hard, but it also began to point out where we were going in the relationship and it made it really clear that something had to change. So if they say no, that's really valuable because now that's more honest, right?
Yeah.
And but it also lets people know this isn't a guarantee. Part of what really helps in this, in my experience, is having tools because the tools begin to make it about the issue as opposed to about the person. As opposed to the sandwich, the tools allows you to say this really hard thing in a really kind way. And that doesn't mean it's not going to hurt. So I just had my teeth cleaned on Monday and they said, "Well, did that hurt?" Well, it always hurts a little bit, right? And
Yeah.
so the it's not that we're trying to go for zero hurt. That's not the point of kindness. But the point of kindness is to only hurt where it's entirely in the other person's benefit and to make it as acceptable and available as possible for the person. So one of the things that I'm kind of passionate about with my clients is that every one of their employees is good and even great at giving core value speeches. And
Mm.
so some of my clients, they have 14, 15 people, and that's not as difficult. Some of them have several hundred, and that's a more challenging thing to have that. And so part of what I work with them is how to create just that framework of a core value speech where each person can do it uniquely, but in there, there's something we call a two-way contract that the core value speech always include this ties so nicely to what you're saying. When a new employee comes on board, my hope is they hear a core value speech from their supervisor, maybe even from an executive, but they also hear it from one or two people that are at their level. And in that, they're hearing about this two-way contract is, Melissa, we saw these core values in you. That's why we hired you, and we're going to hold you to them and tell you if we don't see them as long as you're here. But this is two ways because if you don't see them in me, I absolutely want to hear it. And sometimes people even throw in, and by the way, just last week, Doug told me that I
Call
wasn't
me out.
giving the core value of growth oriented. I'm making it up,
For
but
sure.
and it makes it really powerful. And the employee knows day one, that's the way we do it around here. We actually sit down and talk about it. And then part of the value is having a tool in the EOS world, it's the people analyzer. And I think the predictive index and things like that can also be great tools to have the conversation. But the people analyzer, where you actually, I don't think we have time to do a full people analyzer discussion here, but where you actually are putting on paper in black and white, are they exhibiting those core values most of the time, or sometimes yes, sometimes no, or most of the time no. And also in there, are they really uh, exhibiting the behaviors for their seat of what we need to know? Then we have it totally on the table. And instead of you're not quite meeting expectations, we're down to boom, very incisive. This is the issue. Here's some examples. Now it gives me the opportunity to say, Melissa, what are you going to do about that? And do you need anything from me?
Yeah. The thing I really like about the tools, whether we're looking at a behavioral assessment, we're going through the people analyzer, I like the consideration that we're shoulder to shoulder working on something together rather than me approaching you or you approaching me because we're doing this together. We're looking at this document, we're looking at this report, and we're having a conversation about something external.
Yeah.
I just think it takes the emotion down a little bit, and maybe we're a little less defensive on the receiving end and a little more aggressive on the delivering end. And
Yeah.
so I'm always trying to get, I mean, when I do like debriefs with teams, especially in person, I'll get them to come in like the hot seat is to my right. I'm like, okay, sit here. We're going to look at everybody's PI on the table together. We're going to look at yours. We're going to compare. And it's just about how you fit in the mix
Hmm.
more than where you're right and where you're wrong. And so
Yeah.
I think the power of the tools is less my opinion about you and more something tangible.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it's that constant understanding that I don't have the right answer, but this is what I observe. This is behaviors I'm observing, and then we could talk about it and say what behaviors need to be there. Because at the end of the day, we don't know what's inside the other person, and we don't want to try to play that, but we can say, but this is the behavior we expect.
Yeah. So I'm going to take us a little deeper into a right people, right seat issue that I think is a really hard one for owners to be open and honest about. And that's when we have a really high performing jerk. We have somebody who's high performing in the organization, very well trusted by the leaders, but we know that person is somewhere between difficult and toxic.
Hmm.
But especially if they're at a higher level, the owners rely on them. They really don't want to replace them. That sounds hard. And being open and honest about that. And I've got an example that I'm happy to share if you need a minute to stall and really think back through your Rolodex. But I'd love to hear, how do you coach leaders through some of being open and honest in some of those really, I know those are some of the stickiest conversations.
Yeah, and actually I have several names and
You
faces
might.
popping right to my mind where we've done this. And this is where I had recently one client talk to a prospective client. They knew each other and they said, we had tears and tissues in every one of our initial meetings. By the way, sometimes people think, well, that's more women. It's actually more men, and I'm not after tears, right? That doesn't have to be. That's not the point. But the point is, um, it starts with the leadership team actually having those conversations with one another. Because usually when you have that in the organization, it points back to something in the leadership team. It's always there. And maybe that person is on the leadership team, and us actually being able to go through the people analyzer with each other right there in the open. So, I'm thinking of one example, very talented. And you said they trust the person. And I want to split trust a little bit. I think Brene Brown says there's 7 types of trust. And but they trust them to do the job really well.
Yes.
But
Yes.
they don't trust them to care for the people or to not be corrosive in the organization. And so to split that, um, what tends to happen, and this is driven by fear, it's driven by a scarcity mentality. If they go away, then we'll lose all this money. And that's not an unfounded fear. There's real truth to that. We will lose a great talent in here. And the other fear is we don't know who to fill that seat with. We don't have anybody on staff we can fill that seat with. But what we're also doing, this is the being nice, is we're not actually helping that person to improve in their life. And what this one team I'm specifically thinking, they were on the leadership team, and it took it took them about 6 months in their journey, and I kept tripping over that. And so, but and this is part of the beauty of being the outside facilitator is
Outside eyes is such a, I can see the forest for the trees because I'm only here. I fly in and fly
yeah.
out and I'm seeing it all.
Yeah, and I don't, and no, and I don't have that hesitation. I had a client recently look at my feet and say, "How are your shoes?" And I said, "Fine." Why? He said, "Because you just really stepped in it in there." And I was like, "Yeah, that's. I think that's what it's, you know, why I'm in the room." But it's the team learning, and what I started pushing them on when the issue came up several times is what's happening in the team that you're not dropping this down in your level 10 meetings, because what I realized they were doing is they were starting to say, well, we'll bring it up when Randy's there. And so that's part of it is on the leadership team. But then when it's not on the leadership team, it is the team actually having a discussion, somebody who's not in the room. First is, can we say the name? Most teams don't want to say the name in front of the entire leadership team, which that feels like a whole breakdown of trust because they're really all having the conversation. They just won't have it in front of each other. And
Right.
then is actually developing a plan. And if it is that much risk to the business, develop the plan. And a team I was with just recently, part of their plan was to go back to this person and say, we have to go start looking for a replacement, not to be not to be threatening, but just say because our business depends on it. And if you don't exhibit this core value or these core values, then as talented as you are, that we can't have you part of the team. And what I really loved about it is they realized that they could actually go have that conversation. That way, when the person saw the ad, that doesn't build more distrust, but it's pretty stinking scary to sit down and have it. And they had already addressed the issue. It took them a while to do it, but they had addressed the issue with the people analyzer. And now they're taking this step and they're being completely clear where they're going as an organization. We hope you begin to do that, but if you don't, we got to go this direction and be clear. So there's so many threads to this, Melissa. I'm not sure if I'm hitting on what you're after, but that's kind of what I start seeing to have happen.
Yeah, it's a big challenge I see in a lot of businesses. And so often I see a concern about, well, will there be people that leave with them?
Yeah,
And, do they have people who they've really developed and nurtured in the organization that were outside of this behavior? And typically what I see is that's not the case. Those people stay and everyone levels up to close that gap, even if we didn't find someone right away,
yeah,
because the sentiment from employees is typically, finally, thank you. And if we don't deal with it, our best people start to leave because they don't want to put up with that
yeah,
behavior,
yeah.
whatever it is. Um, and I don't know, it's one of the people issues that I see more than any. And I don't know if that aligns with your experience too, but it is a hard
Absolutely.
one to address.
I can absolutely think of even in my own self of not only seeing it with clients, but of I remember a guy named Mike, and it was like if we lose him, nobody else knows how to run that machine. And guess what? We found somebody we were scrambling, but within 36 hours, we found somebody who could do it temporarily, run this machine that nobody else in the world could run. And then we found the permanent replacement in less than a month. And honestly, it made it was a blip in the business, but we were way better off as a result of it. But I've also left situations where I thought, what are they going to do without me? I mean, I wouldn't have said that out loud because it sounds too arrogant, but they were fine. You know?
I have this concept that I've carried with me for a long time. And it's that sometimes harmony lies on the other side of conflict.
Oh yeah.
So often we spend all this energy spinning about the conflict, but if we could just rip off the band-aid, so often we get to that harmony that we're seeking so much faster
Oh
rather
yeah.
than being on this rocking chair, worrying about it. And we spend a lot of time as leaders, I think, fretting. And once we have the conversation, there's this like, oh, adrenaline rush that's because I got past it. And now I can deal with the pragmatic part of it, but it's the emotional part that we spin around a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it ties so close to the five dysfunctions of the team, which we teach in our annuals, and really
Yeah.
do a deep dive in that of the five dysfunctions. The lack of vulnerability-based trust leads us to a lack of healthy conflict. And usually that's when sometimes people in the room are just like, I don't know. And what I love to point out later in the day and the next day is the team is having really healthy conflict, but they don't even recognize this conflict because they're so accustomed to it being ugly, messy, bloody. They don't realize, oh, actually, this is really healthy conflict. We have tension in the room, and the tension, that's the electrons that are actually creating the energy. You want that. You want to encourage that. You just don't want it to become a bomb. And that's the difference of really having healthy conflict so you can, he goes on to really have that commitment, really have that accountability and focus on results that Lencioni talks about.
Yeah. Okay, so our topic is how to be more open and honest when it comes to people issues. What else is rattling in your brain that we need to make sure we cover before we roll on to tips and tricks and kind of close out our session today? I feel like we should spend 2 days on this topic and
Yeah.
should, but knowing this is an hour podcast, how do we?
Well, what I like to boil it down to is what are the three big things I can work on to be open? And what are the three big things I can work on to be honest? And that's what we walk through with the workshop. That's myself individually, but it's also us as a team. Because if we break it down to those terms, now we can start really digging in as a team. And I'm going to do this at super light speed, because usually
Okay.
for a period of time. But the three big things are number one is to listen. Am I open to listen and learn? And sometimes that's just me. When I go into the meeting, I shut my phone off. I actually don't even have it in the room with me, ideally. There's studies that say you get more done that way. That's a side note.
Yeah, the phone just being on the table is actually its own distraction
That's,
because it's drawing your attention to it like a magnet. It's
yep.
great. Okay,
So,
so I'm gonna listen. What
and,
else?
and then next is vulnerable, to be vulnerable. So first is to be open. The second is to be vulnerable. Am I open with vulnerability? And third is, am I open to change? Because sometimes when I first started this, somebody said, "Isn't that the same? Open to change and open to listen." I say no, because often I'm pretty good. In fact, there's a people book with EOS, and they tell a story about me. I was open to listen in a certain situation, but I really wasn't open to really change and be different. And there was a lack of vulnerability in there. So the open to listen, that is really saying, yep, I'm going to be here, ears wide open, even when what they say is not completely valuable, there's still value. I'd say minimum, there's 10% value in there. So I need to search for that pearl. The vulnerable is me actually trusting the team with what's really important. And just a quick idea of how to do this in the segue in the level 10 meeting. I saw this several years ago and it just struck me how powerful this was.
I'm gonna
Uh,
pause you real quick. For anybody who doesn't know, a level 10 meeting is just a format that you run effective team meetings on. So continue. You can look it up. It's well documented. Go ahead,
Thank
Randy.
you, thank you. And the segue is where we share a piece of personal good news and a piece of professional good news, just to share, let people see what's inside us. And a guy said we had a really great weekend. He could have stopped there with our daughter. He could have stopped there having really good communication because that's been really painful lately. Even when I say it right now, I just get this chill. And it took about an extra 4 seconds to get to two, three, four.
Other than we had a great weekend.
Yeah, so it's so different in there of saying, hey, I'm coming into this meeting to start off and I'm vulnerable. It changes the whole tenor of how we deal with people issues in the rest of the meeting. And it says, I'm letting my guard down. Quick side note, Renee Brown talks about how we spend our childhood having to build up this armor just to stay alive, and that's not unhealthy. But in adulthood is learning to, in a healthy way, let that down. And that's what he did, just a great job of that. And then, oh, am I open to change? Am I coming into my level 10 meeting or a full day or whatever it might be and saying, I'm willing to walk out of here a different person, a different team, in a different company because most of us, I said, well, not most, I think all of us, certainly I fall into this trap sometimes, kind of just want things to stay like the way they are because there's a lot of good things. So that's a quick flyby without giving a lot of examples. The three things are 100% truth, 100% kind, and curious. And just to walk through those a little bit, 100% truth, that means I'm going to actually get it all on the table. And I would say that's extraordinarily difficult and a big challenge for all of us, and certainly for leaders and managers. And then to also do 100% kind, that's also really difficult. But to do them both together, that is crazy hard work. It takes thought, it takes energy, it takes intention. Because what we tend to do is I'll lower my truth to my kindness, or I'll lower my kindness to my truth. And either I'll never go there when I call it kind, it's really being that nice, or it just builds up and just explodes and suddenly
I'm not
makes,
kind,
yeah,
and it's not even all truth because there's a lot of emotion baked in there.
yep. And in here one time somebody said exactly what you said earlier is that when people know we're going to tell the truth, the compliments also mean so much more. My compliments from my wife, I know they're real because she's going to tell me the truth about how I did if I'm speaking or something. And then by the same token, I want to make sure that kindness is I'm saying it in the way they're most likely to hear it. I had one person in one of these workshops really object. She says, as long as I'm telling the truth, that's all that matters. And I said, but not if they can't hear it. Then you're not really communicating truth. You may be having it come out of your mouth, but you're not communicating that truth. And so we could dig a lot more into that. That's one that people really get stuck on. I love the example of the dental hygienist in that case.
Yeah.
We got
Yeah. The how you say things reminds me of the book. Have you read the book Leadership and Self-Deception?
yeah, I give it to every team I work with. I love
It
it.
may be the best value that came out of my master's in business at Texas A&M. This little book, my husband and I read it every year, and every year it's so good. The way we say something, the way we do a behavior
Yeah.
makes a huge impact. And it is one of the best leadership books I've ever found. And there aren't a lot of people who know it. It's part of their repertoire.
Yeah, I'm surprised that more don't know it. And that could be one of the takeaway tips is read that book. And what I tell
That
people
book.
when I hand it to them is, as I say, I have more people tell me this book changed their life than any other book I give people. And I would say it changed me for sure.
It changed mine for sure.
And then other people, it may not change their life, but they say, I know somebody who needs this.
I have once in a while sent that book through Amazon without a note to just someone who really needs to read it.
Are you serious? And they never know? That is funny.
And once in a while I'll send it like, hey, you're one of the most out of the box leaders I've ever met. And this is really, you should know this concept if you don't already, because you display it. The other thing that came to me, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The other thing that really came to me as you were talking about both the open and honest tricks was the listening and really being open to listen. Sometimes there's this concept in nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg.
Yep.
He calls it giraffe ears. And it's like this sort of cover your ears and listen for what they're really saying without listening to their words. Their words might be harsh. They may not know how to do the truth in a kind way. But if you can sort of listen for what they're saying, you can get a lot further and you can be more open to hearing it if you can just kind of strip away the frustration and hear what they're saying. I have this trick that I use. I manage a swim team. I run a swim team for 100 kids here locally. And I often will have parents telling me what we need to do better. And so one summer it was the parent said, you take the photos and they're not professional. And there was some other complaint they had about it. And I said, oh, I hope you're telling me this because you're a photographer and you want to help us, because I would love to have the help. I agree. Me taking him as an ideal, but I tried the professional photographer. He sucked. And I figured, why charge the team something we don't need to pay for? And it's just like, what is the issue? And so the giraffe ears, I think, has added a lot of value.
I love that. Yeah. That is great. And by the way, you're bringing up some great books here. That one is also just tremendous.
Yeah,
So
those are two of my annual listens that I feel like I can never really grasp all of, and I just keep finding nuggets. And I think it has to do with where you are in your life. You
yeah,
hear different things that resonate at different points in your career, different points in parenthood, different points in your relationship with your significant other
yeah,
that resonate.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, let me hit on real quick curiosity, because that's
Okay.
part of honest. Is if we're not curious, part of what we are is arrogant. And that's really key because if people know I'm not being honest in a way that says I may not have all the answers, then that's key. But it also keeps the honesty going. It's almost, like the theater kind of thing where your ad lib theater. You got to keep that going in the room and saying, yes, there's craziness in every organization I've ever seen, but there's always a reason for the craziness and really dig in. And here's the challenge for leaders. The craziness usually points right back here. And that's what we have to understand. Just like the crazy, effective salesperson or production person that we don't want to talk to about the core values because we're fearful, that creates something that looks totally different. And we don't dig down. We're not curious enough as we're speaking. So it's really learning to speak the truth in kindness with questions. And I feel like we've just barely opened the lid on open and honest, and I want to go a lot more, but I know there's not time to fully do that
I
today.
know. So that one piece about curiosity resonates with me in a specific way in all my employee engagement work. Because over the last 17 years of measuring and improving employee engagement within organizations, the thing that I think shocks managers and leaders the most is when I tell them that the actively disengaged population, the people that bitch and moan, they get so frustrated and they're really loud and squeaky wheels, they're often not wrong.
Hmm.
They
Yeah,
just don't have an effective way to share, to communicate their frustration. So we
yeah,
write them off. But if we address those issues, which are often on point, we can find that they flip from an actively disengaged employee to a fully engaged. They skip over all that quiet quitter and
yeah,
partially engaged stuff, and they just are all in. They're like, "You heard me. This was
yeah,
an issue that I saw that I cared about in our business, and you fixed it." And it's a fascinating thing because we think of these people as like they're just negative Nelly, but if we can listen, if we go back to the giraffe ears, if we can hear them and we are curious enough to ask some questions,
hmm.
it's amazing what we can uncover that they know about our businesses. And so that one resonates with me. And I love the way that you said um, that if we aren't curious, it's a hint around arrogance. And that's kind of like nobody wants to be really subjective in their decision making. Nobody wants to be arrogant. There's nobody who aspires to that,
Yeah.
um, except maybe a true narcissist, but we won't go there. So I want to close this up. This has been so valuable, and I really do think we're just touching on the tip of this iceberg, and maybe we gave some great book quotes to help you dive deeper. But here are some of the tips that I took away from this, and maybe you'll have a couple more to this. Um, the acronym around NICE, nothing inside cares enough to say the hard things, that I hadn't heard before and really resonated with me. The interview question around asking people how would someone else, how do other people describe you? I feel like that those are both tactical things for us to think about and use. What are one or two of yours? I could probably go on with 10, but
Well, I'll play off of leadership and self-deception is give it to somebody and maybe read it yourself. But by the way, you say sometimes you send it to people, not saying, I actually, in the last week, I was in a meeting, I just stopped and I just said, Joe, not his real name, Joe, you must read leadership and self-deception and apply it because this will solve this issue. And so, getting comfortable with that, that one is huge. Uh, the other tip is write down open and honest, and write down, open to listen, open with vulnerability, and open to be different. And then just find something in the next 2 weeks you're going to improve on that. And then same thing with honest is 100% truthful, 100% kind, and curious and just come up with one specific thing in the next 2 weeks you're actually going to do that will improve either your openness or your honesty in the organization. And then the next step would be take it to the team and actually make it a team exercise. That can be hugely powerful.
Well, you just brought it back to the original comment you made, which some of this stuff is so simple and it is not easy. And we just have to keep chipping away at it. And I think the reason I'm so grateful for all the EOS implementers in my network is y'all help us move through these things and help us force us to do the activities, because it's hard to facilitate yourself and be in the meeting. It's almost impossible. So having a good facilitator who can walk you down the path, hold you accountable for going all the way and not getting distracted by all the rabbit holes,
Right.
I'm eternally grateful for. So as I close this out, I'd love to give you a chance to tell us how to contact you and what your preferred method would be.
Great. Well, you can probably two big easiest ways are email and phone. My email is randy.mcdougall@eosworldwide.com. And my phone number is 979-574-4571.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm Melissa Ortiz, and best way to contact me is also email and phone. I'm mortiz@activatehcg.com, and my cell phone number is 530-713-6359. And thank you so much for sticking with us. I hope you got some good nuggets, and if nothing else, just go read Leadership and Self-Deception. It will change your personal and professional relationships. So maybe that was the best tip of the day. I don't know. There's good stuff here. Thank you so much, Randy.
All right. Thank you, Melissa.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of You've Got People Problems. If you got something out of the conversation, make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with the other leaders in your network, because let's face it, we all have people problems. You can watch full episodes on YouTube or listen on your favorite podcast app. But either way, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.